He paid for 3 Apache women in public. The silence that followed was terrifying. The morning sun had just started to spread its warm light across the city streets, painting the sidewalks and walls in soft golden hues. People hurried along, some with bags full of groceries, others with briefcases clutched tightly in their hands, all moving as if life itself had set a strict rhythm. Vendors were already busy arranging their stalls, shouting softly to announce fresh fruits, vegetables, and handmade goods. The sound of footsteps, chatter, and occasional laughter created a melody of everyday city life, ordinary yet comforting in its own way. Amid this ordinary scene, a man walked calmly, almost blending into the crowd. He was of average height, with simple clothing that didn't draw attention. But despite his ordinary appearance, there was a quiet confidence in his steps, a sense that he belonged here but also stood apart. He moved with purpose, yet there was no rush in his pace. People barely noticed him, absorbed in their own routines, yet there was an invisible aura around him that made it feel like something important might happen at any moment. Across the street, 3 women made their way slowly toward the same market. Their steps were measured and graceful, yet there was a quiet tension in their movements, a subtle awareness of the world around them. They were Apache women, dressed in traditional attire that shimmered softly in the morning light. Each had a long, flowing skirt with patterns that told stories of generations past. Their hair was carefully arranged, and small, intricate jewelry glinted as they moved. They were carrying small purses and bundles, but their presence commanded more attention than anything they could physically carry. The man noticed them from a distance. He didn't stare, but his eyes followed them gently, recognizing not just their beauty but the quiet dignity they carried. There was something about the way they moved together, as if connected by an invisible thread of history and culture, that stirred something deep within him. He felt a strange mixture of curiosity and respect, knowing instinctively that their presence in this busy city environment was meaningful. They were not merely visitors. They were a living connection to a world that many people around them had forgotten or never truly understood. As he walked closer, the sound of the market grew louder, blending with the soft hum of the city. The women approached a small cafe tucked between 2 larger buildings. The cafe's windows reflected the morning sun, making it sparkle in a way that seemed almost magical. The man paused for a moment, observing them through the crowd, noting the way their eyes scanned the surroundings cautiously. They seemed aware of the stares from some passers-by, the occasional whisper of curiosity or even judgment, but they did not falter. They carried themselves with calm dignity, a silent assertion that they were entitled to their place in this world, just like anyone else. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sweetness of pastries, creating a comforting aroma that drew people in from the streets. A few tables were already occupied, laughter spilling softly from groups of friends catching up after a busy morning. The man stepped inside, his presence almost unnoticed among the casual chatter. He ordered a simple coffee and stood by the counter, observing the women as they approached the small table near the window. The women exchanged quiet words, their voices soft but full of intention. They were discussing what to order, pointing discreetly to menu items while their eyes remained alert, scanning for any sign of disrespect or discomfort from the other patrons. It was clear that they were careful, not because they feared the people around them, but because they had learned to navigate a world that often misunderstood or overlooked them. There was a resilience in their movements, a strength that was invisible yet undeniable. The man watched them carefully. He could feel the tension in the room, a subtle shift as other patrons began to notice the women and indirectly him as well. There was a quiet curiosity in the air, an unspoken question lingering over everyone. What was about to happen? People continued to move and speak, but there was a slight pause in the rhythm of the cafe, a momentary hush that even the background music seemed to acknowledge. He could see the women hesitate as they decided what to order. One pointed at a simple sandwich, another at a cup of coffee, and the third looked at the pastries with a thoughtful expression. They spoke softly, in a language that was melodic and rich, but only the three of them understood it fully. Their conversation was a dance of words and gestures, intimate and private, yet filled with a warmth that radiated outward. The man took a slow breath, feeling a quiet determination build within him. He had noticed the subtle discomfort, the cautious glances from the women and the awareness of the people around them. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change the tone of the morning in ways no one expected. Without hesitation or any need for recognition, he moved toward them. His steps were calm, measured, and confident, yet there was no hurry. The weight of his intention was clear, yet gentle, like a quiet force moving through the room. As he approached the table, the women looked up in surprise. Their eyes met his, and for a moment there was a silent understanding, a shared recognition of something about to happen that neither of them could fully explain. The man smiled softly, a reassuring gesture that communicated respect and kindness without a single word. The women returned the smile, a mix of curiosity and cautious anticipation. Around them, the cafe seemed to pause. The chatter of other patrons softened, the clinking of cups and cutlery slowed, and even the background music felt as though it had quieted in anticipation. People turned slightly in their seats, unable to resist noticing the subtle drama unfolding before them. There was no fear, no anger, no overt excitement, only a deep, quiet curiosity. Something unusual, something extraordinary was about to occur, and everyone felt it. The man reached the table and spoke softly, his voice carrying a calm authority. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't announce himself loudly. He simply placed a small card on the table and nodded politely. The women's eyes widened slightly as they realized what he had done. Without a word, he had paid for their meals. Every item they had chosen, every small indulgence had been taken care of. For a few seconds, there was silence. A heavy, almost tangible silence that seemed to stretch across the room. The women looked at each other, then back at him, their expressions a mixture of shock, gratitude, and disbelief. They had not expected such generosity, and the act itself was so pure, so selfless, that it defied ordinary understanding. The other patrons, too, remained still, unsure how to react. The silence was not uncomfortable, it was powerful, commanding attention without force. The man smiled again, his eyes calm and kind. He did not linger long. After ensuring the women had acknowledged his gesture, he turned and walked back toward the counter, blending once more into the ordinary rhythm of the cafe. But his action had already left a mark. The women whispered softly to each other, still processing what had happened, their faces glowing with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. The cafe itself seemed changed, as if the air carried a little more warmth, a little more understanding, a quiet reminder of the unexpected power of kindness. Outside, the city continued its usual pace, but something subtle had shifted. People passing by the cafe felt a change in the rhythm of the morning, a brief but powerful reminder that extraordinary moments could occur even in the most ordinary places. And inside, the three women sat quietly, their thoughts a mix of astonishment and appreciation, knowing that this morning, this simple act, would remain with them forever. The man's steps faded into the background, but the silence he left behind was anything but empty. It was filled with reflection, connection, and the hauntingly beautiful realization that sometimes the most powerful actions are the quietest ones. The cafe seemed to hold its breath for a moment, as if the walls themselves were aware of the extraordinary gesture that had just taken place. The man had quietly paid for the three Apache women, leaving them astonished and the other patrons staring in disbelief. There was a strange energy in the air, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and a gentle tension that made everyone feel as though they were witnessing something that didn't happen every day. People didn't speak immediately. Instead, they looked at each other, uncertain of how to respond. The three women sat frozen for a few seconds, their hands clasped lightly on their laps. One of them, the youngest, finally whispered a soft word of thanks, her voice barely audible, as though she feared that speaking too loudly might shatter the delicate moment. The other two nodded, their eyes wide, glimmering with a combination of relief and amazement. They had not expected this. Not in a busy, bustling city cafe surrounded by strangers would anyone extend such kindness. It was more than generosity. It was recognition, respect, and a quiet dignity that resonated deep within them. The man remained calm, standing nearby with a gentle smile. He didn't seek recognition, nor did he linger for praise. His action was simple, yet its impact was profound. People around him were beginning to murmur quietly among themselves. Some whispered in admiration, while others seemed confused, as if they couldn't understand why someone would do something so selfless in public. A few turned to their companions, shaking their heads slightly, unable to hide their astonishment. A young mother sitting nearby with her toddler glanced at the scene with curiosity. Her child, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stared wide-eyed at the three women and the man. The mother whispered softly to the child, explaining that sometimes people do kind things simply to help others, without expecting anything in return. The child nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson, as if the small act of generosity was already planting a seed of understanding in young, impressionable minds. The women, still seated, began to relax slightly. They carefully looked at their table, noting that their meals were ready and waiting, all taken care of. The sandwiches were neatly wrapped, the coffee steaming gently in their cups, and the pastries glistened under the morning light. One of the women touched a cup of coffee with a delicate hand, almost as if testing whether it was real, and then smiled softly. The simple act of a stranger covering their meal had touched them deeply. It was more than food. It was a moment of human connection, a recognition of their presence and dignity in a world that often overlooked them. Other patrons were now beginning to notice small details they had missed at first. The cashier, who had taken the payment without question, looked up and smiled quietly, sensing the power of the moment. A man at the next table leaned over to his friend, whispering in disbelief about what had just happened. The cafe, which only minutes ago had been filled with normal chatter and the clinking of cups, now carried a charged, almost magical atmosphere. There was a shared understanding among those present, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had all witnessed something remarkable. The man watched the women's expressions carefully. He noticed how they exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting gratitude and wonder. One of them whispered a quiet word, likely a private expression of thanks or acknowledgement, and the other two nodded in response. The man smiled softly again, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Not satisfaction in pride or recognition, but satisfaction in knowing that a small gesture could create such a profound ripple in the world around him. Outside the cafe, life continued as usual. People walked briskly along the sidewalks, unaware of the subtle drama unfolding inside. The street vendors continued their calls, trying to attract customers. The buses rumbled past, and the distant hum of traffic filled the air. Yet within the walls of the cafe, time seemed to slow. Every small detail, the soft clatter of utensils, the quiet hum of conversation, the gentle aroma of coffee, was heightened, amplified by the tension and awe created by the simple act of generosity. A few moments later, the youngest of the Apache women gathered her courage and spoke softly, in a voice filled with gratitude yet tinged with uncertainty. This is very kind of you," she said. Her English was accented but clear, each word carrying the weight of genuine appreciation. The man nodded politely, his eyes warm and reassuring. He said nothing, allowing his silence to communicate what words could not, that the gesture was offered freely, without expectation, and with sincere respect. The silence that followed was almost terrifying in its intensity. It wasn't frightening in the conventional sense, but it carried a weight that pressed gently against the chest of everyone present. People didn't speak because they were unsure how to react to something so rare, so unexpected, yet so beautiful. The atmosphere was thick with awe and reflection, a collective pause in the ordinary flow of life. Every patron, every employee, every bystander felt it. The moment hung in the air like a delicate, unspoken truth. Some of the older patrons who had witnessed many things in life whispered softly to one another. "I've never seen anyone do that before," one said, "in public and with such calm and respect." The other nodded, his eyes still fixed on the man. "It's unusual," he replied, though his tone carried admiration. Even among people who were normally skeptical or indifferent, the act of generosity resonated deeply. It reminded them that small, selfless actions could carry enormous weight. The women continued to look at the man, their expressions a mix of curiosity, relief, and a quiet acknowledgement of the kindness they had received. Their hands moved slightly, adjusting their belongings or touching a piece of jewelry, as if grounding themselves in the reality of the moment. They were processing the gesture slowly, knowing that this memory would linger long after the cafe had emptied, long after the city returned to its usual rhythm. The man, sensing that the moment had reached its peak, stepped back slightly. He didn't want to intrude further. His presence had already created a ripple, a quiet wave that would spread among those present. The women returned to their discussion, softly talking among themselves, their voices now carrying notes of relief and happiness rather than tension. They spoke in their native language, a melodic exchange that the other patrons could not understand, yet the emotion was clear to everyone present. Gratitude, respect, and a touch of awe filled the space. Nearby, a young waiter paused mid-step, noticing the scene. He had taken many orders before, served countless meals, yet this simple act of kindness struck him deeply. He watched the man with quiet admiration, realizing that generosity could come in small, almost invisible packages, yet still hold immense power. His day suddenly felt different, brighter somehow, simply because he had witnessed someone act selflessly. A few other patrons began to murmur, their voices low but filled with recognition. Some praised the man silently to themselves, while others seemed lost in thought, reflecting on their own lives. The cafe, which had been just another place to grab a quick meal, now held a deeper significance. It had become a space where ordinary people witnessed an extraordinary human connection, a moment where kindness transcended cultural, social, and personal boundaries. The man finally turned, preparing to leave the cafe. He moved with the same calm, purposeful steps he had when he entered. His departure was quiet, unnoticed by most, yet those who had watched him closely felt the lingering impact of his presence. The three women exchanged one last glance, their eyes shining with gratitude. They whispered softly among themselves, their conversation filled with warmth, relief, and the shared recognition of something profoundly human. Even after the man had walked away, the atmosphere remained charged. Patrons returned to their meals, yet the cafe felt different. There was a subtle awareness in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that something unusual had occurred. The women continued eating, but their smiles and soft laughter carried a new lightness. They had experienced generosity, respect, and human kindness in its purest form. And the other people present, though not directly involved, carried the memory of the silence, the astonishment, and the beauty of witnessing an unexpected act of selflessness. Outside, the city carried on. Vendors called, cars honked, and people rushed about their daily lives. But inside the cafe, the memory lingered. It was a reminder that even in a world filled with routine, ordinary moments, extraordinary acts could occur. All it took was one person, moving quietly and deliberately, to change the atmosphere, to touch hearts, and to remind everyone present that humanity could be gentle, kind, and unexpectedly powerful. The man's actions had created more than a simple moment of generosity. They had opened a window into human possibility, showing that kindness could ripple through a crowd, affect lives silently, and leave an unforgettable impression. And as the three Apache women finished their meal, their hearts lighter and spirits lifted, they carried with them the memory of someone who had chosen to act with courage, humility, and unwavering respect. It was a moment that would stay with them forever. The silence in the cafe stretched longer than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't the ordinary kind of silence, the one that happens when people are lost in thought or busy with their own lives. This silence was heavier, more profound, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every sound, the soft clinking of spoons against cups, the occasional shuffle of a chair, the distant hum of traffic outside, seemed amplified, highlighting the stillness that had settled over the room. It was a silence that demanded attention, a silence that made everyone present realize they were witnessing something unusual, something quietly extraordinary. The three Apache women sat at their table, still processing the act of generosity that had just occurred. The youngest of the three leaned slightly forward, resting her chin on her hand, eyes fixed on the man who had moved away but remained in the room. She spoke softly to her companions, words flowing in their native language, a language filled with history, culture, and stories passed down for generations. Though the other patrons could not understand, they could feel the weight of the conversation, the emotions that hovered between curiosity, astonishment, and gratitude. The middle woman, older and more reserved, finally spoke, her voice carrying a calm authority. She shared her thoughts quietly, reflecting on the unexpected kindness they had received. Her words were careful, measured, yet full of warmth. She expressed how rare it was to encounter such a gesture, especially in public, and how it made them feel both honored and vulnerable. Her hands moved gently, smoothing the folds of her skirt, a subtle display of grace under the quiet tension that had gripped the room. The man, standing a short distance away, observed them carefully without intrusion. He noticed the subtle exchange of emotions, the surprise, the disbelief, the dawning realization that someone had acted purely out of goodwill. There was no expectation of repayment, no desire for recognition, only the quiet, powerful act of giving. His eyes, calm and steady, reflected a deep understanding of the impact that even a small gesture could have on human lives. Around them, the other patrons of the cafe remained silent, though their attention had fully shifted to the unfolding scene. Some glanced at each other with a mixture of confusion and admiration, unsure how to react. A young man sitting nearby leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide as he absorbed the atmosphere. He felt a strange mixture of awe and discomfort, unsure why such a simple act could carry so much weight. Others whispered quietly among themselves, commenting on the man's kindness, expressing disbelief, or reflecting on how rarely they had witnessed generosity without expectation in their own lives. The waitress, who had been serving tables all morning, paused mid-step. Her hand still carried a tray, but her gaze was fixed on the three women and the man. She felt something stirring within her, a sense of inspiration, a reminder of the quiet power of human connection. She realized that her role, though small, was part of a larger story unfolding in that room, and she felt a deep sense of appreciation for being a witness to this unusual moment. The silence was almost oppressive, yet it was not unpleasant. It was the kind of silence that forced people to reflect, to slow down, to pay attention. Every patron in the cafe, whether they realized it or not, was being drawn into the moment, experiencing the profound effects of generosity and human decency. Even the clinking of cups and the soft rustling of paper seemed to participate in the shared experience, creating a rhythm that was both gentle and powerful. The youngest Apache woman finally broke the silence. Her voice, though soft, carried a quiet intensity. She thanked the man again, her words heartfelt, simple, and sincere. We did not expect this," she said, glancing at her companions. "Thank you for seeing us." The man nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without speaking. His silence spoke volumes, conveying respect, understanding, and the simple truth that kindness needed no explanation. The middle woman looked around the room, noticing the reactions of the other patrons. Some were still watching, their faces curious or reflective, while others had returned to their meals but seemed subtly changed, as if the atmosphere had shifted in a way they could not fully articulate. She whispered to her companions about the weight of the moment, about how rare it was for someone to act without expectation, purely to honor another human being. The words were soft, almost meditative, yet they carried a resonance that extended beyond their table, reaching the hearts of those who could feel it. Outside, the city moved on with its usual rhythm. The noise of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant calls of street vendors created a familiar urban soundtrack. But inside the cafe, the world had slowed. Time itself seemed to stretch, allowing the moment to linger, to expand, to leave a mark on everyone present. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It had become a presence in itself, a living reminder of what could happen when someone chose to act with generosity and courage. The oldest of the three women finally spoke, her voice steady and filled with quiet authority. She reflected on the courage it must have taken for the man to act in public, knowing that his gesture would draw attention, knowing that others might judge or misunderstand him. Her words were careful, yet they conveyed admiration and respect. "It takes courage to be kind," she said softly, "especially when no one expects it." Her companions nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting a deep appreciation for the subtle power of his actions. The man, observing the women, felt a quiet satisfaction. He knew that the act itself was small in material terms, yet he also understood its significance. It was not just about paying for a meal. It was about recognition, dignity, and the affirmation of humanity. He had offered a simple gesture, but the effect rippled through the room, touching hearts, sparking reflection, and creating a shared awareness of the profound impact of selfless acts. The other patrons slowly began to stir, breaking the silence gently. A few murmured quietly to their companions, sharing thoughts about what had happened, while others returned to their meals with a subtle smile or a thoughtful expression. Even those who had not been paying close attention now carried the memory of the moment, a reminder that small actions could hold immense meaning. The atmosphere in the cafe had shifted, becoming warmer, softer, and more reflective. A young man near the counter watched the man leave the cafe. He had been skeptical at first, unsure why anyone would act so selflessly. But now, seeing the quiet impact of the gesture, he felt something shift within him. He realized that kindness could be contagious, that one small act could inspire others to notice, to reflect, and perhaps even to act differently in their own lives. The memory of the man's calm, deliberate action lingered, planting a seed of inspiration that might grow in unexpected ways. The three women, meanwhile, were finally beginning to relax fully. Their laughter, soft and melodic, filled the space as they shared their thoughts about what had just happened. They spoke in their native language, exchanging stories and reflections, but the emotion behind their words was clear to anyone who took the time to notice. Gratitude, wonder, and a subtle sense of relief mingled in the air, creating a warmth that seemed to extend beyond their table, touching everyone present. Even the staff of the cafe felt the lingering effects of the moment. The barista paused while preparing a drink, reflecting on what he had witnessed. The waitress, carrying plates to other tables, felt a quiet inspiration stirring within her, a renewed sense of purpose and awareness of the power of human connection. The manager, standing near the counter, smiled softly to himself, understanding that sometimes the smallest gestures could leave the largest impact. The silence, once heavy and almost intimidating, had transformed into something profound. It had become a shared experience, a collective acknowledgement of the beauty of selfless action. The room, which had been filled with ordinary sounds of a busy morning, now carried a quiet reverence, a sense that everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary. It was a reminder that even in the midst of routine, in the most ordinary places, moments of true humanity could emerge, creating memories that would linger long after the noise of the world returned. The man, now stepping out of the cafe, carried with him no sense of pride or accomplishment. His act was simple, quiet, and deliberate, but he knew its significance. He had created a moment of connection, a ripple of kindness that extended beyond the immediate interaction. The women, still seated, would remember it forever. The other patrons, too, carried the memory, a subtle shift in their understanding of generosity, courage, and the quiet power of human action. Outside, the sunlight shone brightly, reflecting off the buildings and streets, illuminating the city with a soft, golden glow. The air was filled with the usual sounds of urban life, but for those who had witnessed the act in the cafe, the day felt subtly different. There was a quiet hope, a gentle reminder that even in a busy, indifferent world, kindness could emerge, powerful and transformative, changing hearts without a single loud word. The three Apache women gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. Their faces were bright with emotion, a mixture of gratitude, joy, and quiet reflection. They exchanged one last glance with the man, who nodded softly in acknowledgement. Without a word, the unspoken connection between them was clear. A bond forged not through familiarity, but through the simple, profound act of kindness in public. And as they stepped out of the cafe into the bustling streets, the memory of the silence, the awe, and the unexpected generosity followed them. It was a moment they would carry forever, a story of courage, respect, and the quiet power of human connection, proving that even the smallest actions could leave the deepest impressions. After the man left the cafe, a subtle energy remained in the air, one that seemed to linger, longer than the simple act itself. It was not just the memory of a kind gesture. It was a presence that touched everyone in the room, leaving them thoughtful, quiet, and slightly changed. The three Apache women remained seated for a few moments, still processing everything. They were aware that something unusual had happened, something that went beyond the ordinary boundaries of everyday life. Their conversation was low and gentle, filled with words of gratitude and reflections on what they had experienced. The youngest spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "I have never felt so seen, so respected in a public place." Her words were careful, chosen with thought and emotion, and they carried a weight that could be felt by anyone close enough to notice. The other two nodded, acknowledging the shared understanding of the moment. It was more than a gesture, it was recognition, and that recognition felt rare, almost sacred in a world where people often rushed past one another without truly seeing. The cafe patrons, still present, began to move more naturally, but the air remained charged with quiet reflection. Some whispered to their companions, sharing impressions of the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" one person murmured. "He just paid for their meal and there was no reason, no request, nothing at all. He just did it." Another nodded, her eyes still fixed on the departing man, her voice soft, almost reverent. "It's rare, isn't it? To see someone act so purely without expectation." The words hung in the air, leaving others to consider the power of such a simple act. Even the cafe staff were affected. The barista paused while making a drink, feeling a new awareness of the potential for small acts of kindness. The waitress carried plates to other tables, but her steps felt lighter, her heart lifted by the reminder that even in the midst of routine work, moments of extraordinary humanity could occur. The manager, leaning against the counter, smiled quietly to himself, appreciating the subtle beauty of the moment. Everyone present had been touched, in one way or another, by the calm courage and generosity of the man. The three Apache women gathered their things, their movements graceful but careful. They were aware of the lingering attention in the cafe, the subtle glances and quiet whispers from those around them. Yet they carried themselves with dignity, understanding that their experience had created a ripple beyond their table. Their connection to the moment extended beyond the physical act of paying for a meal. It had created an emotional and spiritual acknowledgement of their presence in the world, something that they would carry with them forever. As they left the cafe, stepping into the streets now bustling with mid-morning activity, they noticed subtle shifts in the attention of people around them. Some pedestrians glanced curiously, others smiled softly, sensing that they had just witnessed something unusual. The city moved with its usual rhythm. Cars honked, people chatted on the sidewalks, street vendors called out their goods. But there was an invisible thread connecting the cafe to the larger world outside. It was as if the simple act of kindness had stretched beyond its immediate moment, leaving a quiet, lasting impression on the collective consciousness of those nearby. The man, meanwhile, walked through the streets with calm confidence. He had no need for recognition or applause. His action was complete, and yet he could feel the quiet echoes of the moment following him. In his mind, he reflected not on himself, but on the importance of acknowledging others, on the significance of small gestures that could ripple outward and create change. He understood that human connection was fragile, often overlooked, and yet infinitely powerful when nurtured through genuine respect and kindness. Back in the cafe, the patrons continued their day, but the energy lingered. Conversations flowed differently now, quieter and more thoughtful. Even casual remarks seemed to carry a deeper meaning, influenced by the silent lesson of generosity they had witnessed. Some people returned to their routines with a subtle shift in perspective, inspired to notice the world more carefully, to act with more awareness and empathy. Others simply carried the memory with them, an internal spark that could ignite thought, reflection, or action at a later moment. Among the three Apache women, the older spoke softly to her companions as they walked toward the street. "It is not often that someone honors us so openly, so without question," she said. "It is rare to feel this kind of respect, especially from strangers." The words were simple but filled with meaning. They were reflecting not just on the act itself, but on what it represented, recognition of their humanity, their culture, and their dignity. It was a moment that affirmed that they mattered, that their presence was acknowledged, and that sometimes, even in the ordinary flow of life, extraordinary moments could occur. A young boy, holding his mother's hand, noticed the women passing by. He stared, eyes wide, curious about their colorful clothing and the quiet grace they carried. The mother leaned down and whispered, "See, sometimes people do kind things without reason. And sometimes it touches others in ways we may not even see." The child nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson without fully understanding, but feeling it nonetheless. The ripple of kindness was moving outward, affecting even those who had not witnessed the act directly. The three women reached a quiet corner of the street and paused. They exchanged soft words in their native language, reflecting on the generosity they had received. One of them, her voice gentle but firm, said, "It is more than the meal. It is the recognition, the respect, the courage it took to act openly without expecting anything." Her companions nodded, understanding fully. The act had created a space where humanity was visible, where kindness and respect transcended social barriers, and where simple generosity carried profound meaning. Meanwhile, the man continued his walk through the city streets, his thoughts quiet and steady. He noticed small things along the way: a woman struggling to carry groceries, a man helping an elderly neighbor cross the street, children laughing as they played in a park. Each observation reinforced his belief that acts of kindness, no matter how small, were essential to the fabric of human connection. His gesture in the cafe was only one example, but it represented a larger philosophy: that generosity, respect, and empathy could ripple outward, inspiring others, changing the tone of a moment and creating lasting impressions. Back in the cafe, the atmosphere slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy had changed. Patrons ate with a quiet awareness, staff moved with a subtle lightness, and even the background music seemed to resonate differently, carrying a softer, more thoughtful tone. Conversations included reflections on kindness, shared stories of generosity, and even quiet plans to extend small gestures to others later in the day. The ripple effect of the man's actions had begun, spreading outward in subtle but powerful ways, touching hearts and inspiring thought in ways that could not be immediately measured. The three Apache women, now further down the street, reflected on the significance of the moment. It was more than a single act of kindness. It was a reminder that humanity was present even in unexpected places. They discussed how rare it was to encounter someone who acted without expectation, and how transformative such encounters could be. Each word, each glance, carried gratitude, understanding, and a quiet affirmation of dignity and recognition. Meanwhile, the man disappeared into the flow of the city, blending seamlessly with the ordinary rhythm of life. Yet his impact remained tangible, like a stone thrown into water, sending ripples across a surface that extended far beyond the initial point of contact. People who had witnessed the event would carry it with them: the memory of unexpected generosity, the quiet courage it took to act in public, and the silent affirmation of human dignity that it represented. As the morning unfolded into midday, more people became aware of the subtle changes around them. Conversations were softer, interactions warmer, and even small gestures, a smile, a nod, a quiet word of encouragement, felt imbued with greater meaning. The cafe, once just a place for coffee and snacks, had become a space where human connection was visible, and where the ripples of kindness extended beyond the immediate moment. The three women eventually reached their destination, their spirits lifted by the encounter. They spoke quietly about the unexpected act, reflecting on the lessons it had offered. Each step they took carried a sense of purpose and gratitude, a recognition that even in a world often busy, chaotic, and indifferent, moments of generosity could shine brightly, leaving lasting impressions. And though the man had disappeared from sight, his presence lingered in countless ways. In the cafe, in the streets, in the minds and hearts of everyone who had witnessed the act, there was a quiet resonance of his generosity. It was a reminder that courage and kindness were not bound by social norms or expectation. They were choices, small but infinitely powerful, capable of touching lives and inspiring change. By the end of the morning, the city carried on with its usual pace. Yet for those who had been touched by the gesture, life felt subtly different. The ripple effect had begun, spreading from one table in a cafe to the streets, to the people passing by, and into the hearts of everyone who had taken a moment to notice. And somewhere, the man walked quietly, knowing that even a small, simple act could create waves far larger than the moment itself. The day had moved forward, yet for many who had been present in the cafe that morning, the memory of what had happened remained vivid. The man who had quietly paid for the three Apache women's meals had long since disappeared into the rhythm of the city, blending seamlessly with the crowd. Yet his actions lingered like a gentle echo, quietly influencing everyone who had witnessed the moment. People who had been strangers to one another felt a shared awareness, a silent acknowledgement of having seen something extraordinary. The three Apache women continued their journey through the city, their pace slower now, as if they wanted to savor every sensation, every thought, and every feeling the morning had brought. They had stepped into the world carrying their culture, history, and dignity, and now they were walking with the added weight of recognition. They had been honored in a way that was simple yet profound, and the emotional impact was still unfolding within them. Every glance, every movement, and every breath carried a sense of connection to something larger than themselves, something that transcended ordinary life. As they walked, they spoke softly to one another. Their conversation was filled with gratitude, reflection, and subtle wonder. "It is not just the meal," one said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "It is the thought behind it, the courage to act in public, and the respect he showed us without asking for anything in return." The others nodded, understanding completely. They had experienced something rare, an act of kindness that did not seek recognition, did not depend on their response, and yet carried a power that was almost visible in the air around them. Everywhere they passed, the city seemed alive with ordinary activity, yet the women perceived it differently now. They noticed small gestures, a man holding the door for another, a child helping a friend pick up a dropped toy, a woman smiling kindly at a stranger. Each of these small moments seemed connected to the ripple of kindness they had witnessed. It was as if the man's quiet generosity had opened their eyes to the subtle ways people could make a difference in each other's lives, even when it seemed insignificant. Meanwhile, the cafe continued to hum with life, but the energy had subtly shifted. Patrons who had witnessed the act carried the memory with them, reflecting quietly on the nature of generosity and human connection. A young couple spoke in hushed tones about what they had seen, wondering if they themselves could act with such courage. A few friends shared their thoughts with one another, exchanging ideas about how small gestures of kindness could ripple outward, influencing people in ways that were not immediately visible. The cafe, ordinary in appearance, had become a place where a lesson in humanity had quietly unfolded, touching hearts and inspiring reflection. The man himself had returned to his usual routine, walking calmly through the streets, observing the world around him. He saw people rushing to their destinations, faces filled with concentration, some with worry, others with fatigue. Yet he also noticed moments of kindness, small, unremarkable gestures that often went unnoticed. A driver stopped to let a pedestrian cross, a stranger returned a lost item to someone, a child shared a toy with another. Each of these small acts, he knew, carried the same essence as his gesture in the cafe, the quiet power of recognizing another person's presence and humanity. As the day continued, the three women arrived at a small park, a peaceful space surrounded by trees and flowers, where the noise of the city softened into gentle whispers of nature. They found a bench and sat together, letting the warmth of the sun and the calm of the surroundings settle over them. They reflected on the morning's events, talking softly, their voices mingling with the sound of leaves rustling and birds singing. "We will remember this forever," one said, her voice filled with sincerity. "It is a story that belongs to us now and to everyone who saw it." The others nodded, understanding that this moment was rare and precious, a memory that would remain vivid in their hearts for the rest of their lives. In the city beyond the park, people who had been present in the cafe carried the memory with them, too. The ripple effect continued subtly but powerfully. Some smiled at strangers more openly, others offered small acts of help or encouragement to those they encountered. A man carrying groceries offered to help a woman struggling with a heavy bag. A student paused to allow an elderly neighbor to pass. Even the smallest gestures felt imbued with meaning, as if the lesson of generosity had been quietly absorbed by everyone who had witnessed it. As afternoon arrived, the women left the park, walking slowly through streets that now seemed filled with possibilities. Their hearts were light, yet filled with reflection. The act of kindness they had received had created a space for them to see the world differently, to appreciate the small gestures that often went unnoticed, and to understand the subtle power of human connection. They talked about how rare it was to encounter someone willing to act so selflessly, and how much it meant to feel honored and respected in a public space, where the world often overlooks dignity in its rush of daily activity. Meanwhile, the man continued on his way, unaware of the full ripple effect he had created. He had no desire for recognition, no need for thanks. For him, the act itself was enough. He understood that kindness was not measured by its visibility or by acknowledgement, but by the impact it created quietly, often in ways that could not be immediately seen. Yet he could sense, even as he walked among the crowd, that something subtle had shifted in the city that day. There was a gentle warmth in the air, a softening of the ordinary rush of life, and a quiet reminder of the value of human connection. Back at the cafe, as evening approached, the staff reflected on the day's unusual morning. The manager shared quietly with the barista and waitress about what they had seen, discussing the quiet impact of simple acts. They talked about how kindness could inspire others, how one person's choice to act with respect and generosity could change the energy of a space, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Even the smallest gestures, they realized, could create powerful ripples, touching hearts in ways that extended far beyond the initial moment. The three Apache women eventually made their way home, their conversation turning to the lessons of the day. They spoke of gratitude, humility, and the beauty of human connection. One of them said softly, "This day has reminded me that humanity exists in the smallest moments, and that one person can make a difference without seeking anything in return." Her companions nodded, each reflecting quietly on the truth in her words. The memory of the man's gesture had become more than a single moment. It had transformed into a lesson about courage, respect, and the quiet power of kindness in public spaces. As night fell, the city lights illuminated the streets, casting a soft glow over the sidewalks, buildings, and passing cars. People moved through the evening with the usual pace, but for those who had been touched by the morning's events, life felt subtly different. There was a new awareness of the small opportunities to act with kindness, a recognition that even minor gestures could have a profound impact, and a quiet hope that others would notice and carry forward the lesson of generosity. The three women arrived at their homes, their minds still reflecting on the events of the morning. They sat together in quiet conversation, speaking softly about what they had learned, about how rare it was to feel recognized and respected, and about the lasting impact of even the simplest acts of generosity. They knew that the memory of the man's gesture would remain with them forever, a story they would tell and retell, a lesson in courage, kindness, and human connection that would never fade. Meanwhile, the man, returning to his own home, carried no sense of pride or accomplishment. He understood that the act itself had already accomplished everything it needed to. The ripple of kindness had begun, spreading outward in ways he might never fully witness, touching hearts, inspiring reflection, and creating subtle changes in the lives of those who had been present. For him, the act was complete, yet its quiet impact would continue, moving through the city like an invisible thread connecting strangers, friends, and even those who had not realized they had been touched. The cafe, now closed for the night, held the memory of the morning like a secret treasure. The staff, the patrons, and even the walls seemed to carry a quiet reverence, a gentle acknowledgement of what had occurred. For those who had witnessed the gesture, the day had become more than ordinary. It had been a lesson in the power of selfless action, in the strength of recognition, and in the subtle but profound ways that human connection could manifest in everyday life. In the quiet of the night, the three women reflected on the lessons they had learned. They spoke of courage, empathy, and the importance of acting with kindness, even when it seemed that no one else would notice. They understood that the man's actions were not just about a meal, but about recognition, respect, and the affirmation of humanity. The simple act had transformed into a powerful story, one that would remain in their hearts and minds, inspiring them to carry forward the message of generosity in their own lives. And somewhere, in the midst of the city's ordinary rhythm, the man rested quietly, knowing that the impact of his actions would continue. The ripple effect had begun, touching lives in ways visible and invisible, reminding everyone who had witnessed it that kindness, courage, and respect were choices each person could make. The story of that day, the three Apache women, the quiet generosity, and the silence that followed, would remain a testament to the power of human connection, proving that even in a busy, indifferent world, one small act could create a lasting and unforgettable impression.